Hello, everybody, and welcome to another hopefully exciting episode of Office Hours. It's Office Hours number 79, issue 79. We're getting there. We're getting to 100. We would be at 100 if it weren't for Hot for Teacher, and God knows we love Hot for Teacher, so let's not worry about it. Another 20 episodes, and then that's it. We get to 100, then I'm done, right? That's it? We finish at 100? No. I did find out today, and I will give you more details about this in the future, but I found out today, you may or may not know this already, I'm going to be visiting Poland. I'm visiting Poland for PureCon, which is, I believe, how you pronounce it. I'm from North America. My Polish pronunciation is not great, but I'm going to go to Poland, and as part of that, I'm going to be on some panels. I'm going to be running some games, but I'm also going to be doing an episode of Office Hours. It's going to be live in Poland from a convention, and we're probably going to stream it. We're still working out all the details, so this is kind of the announcement of the pre-announcement, but I'm super excited. I've done now Office Hours. We've done it live. Let's see. We've done it live in Texas. We've done it live in Washington. Have I done it in Boston yet? I don't think so. But yeah, lots of Office Hours around the world. Now I got to do one in Asia, one in South America. Get the world covered. But for now, this episode of Office Hours is coming to you live from my office in Vancouver, where I always am. So nothing new here. But today, as with every episode, we have 3 cool questions about tabletop RPGs. I got a question about complicated social issues. I got a question about experience points. And I got a question about taking all of this stuff and bundling it up and putting it on the internet. So we got a question about streaming. So we're going to jump right in. The question 2 and question 3, I'm going to read to you myself. But our first question from Darren is it's a longer one, so we'll buckle up and let Darren explain it. But before we do, if you're watching this and you think, man, how do I get my questions on the show? How do we do that? The answer is you go to www.adam-koble.com, click on the Office Hours link, fill out that form. If you'd like, you can record your voice. If you don't want to, that's okay. I like hearing you, but that's all right if you don't want to. And then that's it. And then I have your question, and then I answer it on the show. We are, I want to say 6 or 7 weeks behind on questions. I'm answering questions today from the end of December, mid-end of December. So don't worry if your question doesn't come up right away. We have quite a backlog, as you can imagine, because people have lots and lots of questions about game mastering and how it works. And today, the question we're going to begin with comes from Darren. Darren, what you got?
Hello, Adam. I was wondering what your thoughts were on how we should treat literature and art that hasn't aged well from an ethical standpoint. It's the nature of humanity that morality changes from generation to generation. Our ancestors were bigots, and our descendants will probably look back at us similarly. Far Verona and all the interesting socio-political content in the faction turn was what really got me thinking. It's a fictional universe, but there's lots of room for sandbox allegory and exploring modern isms and ethics. Hate the author and love the work, cherry-pick sections, or all or nothing it. What past influences are okay to draw from for our works, and which should just stay buried? Who gets to make that call? For my campaigns, I want to maintain creative integrity and not race or gender wash it. I don't like forcing artificial diversity or pulling punches on how humans actually treat each other. However, I don't want to offend my players, and I certainly don't want them to think that because NPCs or the themes explored are bigoted or unethical that I, the person, condone that behavior. I want to explore the nature of true evil and moral quandaries, not just mustache-twirling Bond villains. I want to have a safe, consenting environment for my players. So, how do I present the unethical in an ethical matter? Thank you for your time, and I look forward to more wonderful GM advice.
So I picked Darren's question because I feel like listening to it, I was having kind of like a roller coaster of emotional responses or of thought response, right? I was thinking about it, and while I was listening, there were moments where I was like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Definitely. That's definitely a thing we should do and talk about. And then there are other parts where I was like, oh, that's well, you have a strange opinion about how this, like, it's interesting. It goes up and down so much just within this question, and I think it encapsulates a lot of the way that people look at creating adversity in games, and they look at creating narrative and exploring themes and whatever. Now, I'm someone who I like to dig in. I like to explore themes. I like to use the world to ask and maybe answer questions, not only about its fictional universe, but about the world that we live in, right? This is, and I've said this a million times, but like Darren mentioned sci-fi. Darren mentioned Far Verona, and science fiction is fundamentally as a genre not about the future, but about the anxieties of the present as extrapolated out into an imaginary future. Right. This is why science fiction from the 50s looks like the 50s, and sci-fi from the 80s looks like the 80s, and what we're making today looks like our own anxieties about things like culture and economics and ecology and race and gender, and we extrapolate that out into an imaginary future so that we can explore it a little bit. And I think that if sci-fi is allowed to do it as a fictional genre, right, as TV and movies and video games, I think so too are we allowed to use our role-playing games to explore kind of what ifs or what ares of the world we live in. Now, I think that it's the idea that we're just allowed or entitled to do that comes from a pretty privileged place, right? Like, you can't just assume, like, I am going to explore the nature of true evil, and I'm just going to dump this on the table, and the players will deal with it, right? And we'll just handle it. And the reason why I chose to answer this question, rather than just kind of like find another one that was phrased differently or talk about it in a different way, the reason why I picked Aaron's question is because the important bit in this is I want to have a safe, consenting environment for my players. Right? That's what Darren said. And that is hands down the most important part of trying to do something like this, right? Because to create a safe environment, you need the players to consent to engaging in that narrative. You need to discuss this with your players during your session 0 or your session -1, right? When you're first starting to think about things that you might find interesting in a game, you posit that stuff to your players, and you all have a conversation as human beings who are creating a fictional narrative together about what kinds of things you are interested in as a group, where your boundaries are, checking in with each other about not only creating a narrative that is safe for you, but if there are people who are going to be watching it or consuming it in any way, if you are going to be putting this out into the world, you got to make sure that you're doing an ethical job of it, right? And the thing that is going to allow you to do all of that is your skill. And I know you already have this skill because you're trying to be a better game master. Your skill at listening, right? Listening to your players, listening to your own anxieties and feelings of like, is this okay? Am I doing this in a way that is doing justice to the material? And listening to the feedback of the people around you, right? This idea that you want to explore something that might be complex or difficult in real life in a fictional setting, I think is totally valid and completely real. And this is something that I think every group to some degree or another explores, right? You can say things in character that might be hard to say out of character. You can explore an identity that is not your own, but there are ways to do it properly and ways to do it improperly, in the sense of as you say, presenting the world in an ethical manner, right? There's a lot to this, and obviously I'm not going to be able to kind of give you everything that you need, and certainly I have no way in the time that we have allotted to answer how we should treat literature and art that hasn't aged well from an ethical standpoint. Right? Like, I'm not an art scholar. I'm not a media professor, right? I know about role-playing games, so I can talk about that. So for me, there are certain genres, there are certain elements of games, there's just some stuff that I am not interested in because it crosses that line, right? There are creators who have made things that either they themselves, the creator, is a garbage human being, or the thing that they make is a trash fire of awkwardness, and I just won't touch that stuff because I don't want to support it as a player. I don't want to support it as a consumer. That stuff is just off the table. I'm not interested in material that has been. I avoid Conan and I avoid Lovecraft, not only because they have sort of problematic stuff in them, not primarily because of that, but because they're not great. Like, I just don't think that they're as good as settings. They're not as good as fiction as some people think that they are, right? We have this attachment to stuff that's been around for a long time. Tolkien walks that very thin line for me. And so does Herbert, right? Like, there is stuff in the past, and as you acknowledged, Darren, there's stuff that we can be inspired by, but that we can cut up and throw out the things that we don't, right? We don't have to take things wholesale, right? What Darren says about cherry picking sections, you don't want to all or nothing the thing. You can say, okay, what is interesting about Lovecraft, right? What's interesting about Lovecraft to me is the sort of cosmic horror, the existentialist viewpoint, the dark, uncaring universe. That stuff is interesting. What's not interesting is all the early 1900s bullshit racism, right? You can cut that stuff out, and we can hold in our mind an appreciation for some aspects of a thing, and in a way appreciate them deeper by excising the stuff that we now recognize to be just like pretty harmful. And as a hobby, as a Dungeons and Dragons, as a hobby and as a game, it still has a lot of work to do in that regard because it's so derived from those materials and is so tangled up in that stuff. So it's a question of recognizing the things in the material that inspires you and choosing the things that you find interesting or cool, and bringing them into your game. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot wholesale, for example, play a game of Call of Cthulhu and examine its racism as a concept, but I think that's much, much harder to do in a way that is meaningful and productive, because for me at least, like, my perspective on that stuff is pretty ill-informed. So I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing that to the table. I try not to pretend to be an authority on stuff that I clearly am not an authority on. And in that case, I tend to defer to people who know better, right? And sometimes there are just topics that I don't feel qualified bringing into my game. So it's a question of knowing your own limitations and not trying to plant a flag in a topic that you're not immersed in, or a topic that you're not an expert in, which I think is interesting because it sort of runs counter to the idea that we're using games to explore stuff, but that's the moral and ethical thing about it, right? So I think the way that you can present, like, let's use a real example, right? I'm all about real examples. So let's use a real example here. So when we sat down to do the third season of Burning Wheel for Roll20, right? We sat down to do the third season. We agreed as a group. So Andrew, Elf, Dave, Blue Jay, and I agreed as a group that we were going to explore in our game a fairly aggressively patriarchal society. We were going to say that the game setting we are playing in takes traditionally patriarchal attitudes towards people, right? It has very clear ideas of what gender is. It takes very clear ideas about what the universe has to say about men and women's roles, and it has this very hard line, and we are going to make characters that butt up against that line. We are going to explore that idea in a fictionalized fantasy setting. And that was something we all agreed on. We discussed it. We talked about how my role would be to push on that, right? To say, I'm going to play essentially the patriarchy. I'm going to play the characters who are trying to reinforce that, who are going to fight your characters. You are going to experience that pushback. You're going to experience that adversity in the game. And Is that something you are comfortable exploring? Is that something that you want to do? Part of my job is saying like, yeah, that's within my boundaries. I feel comfortable doing that because it's hard sometimes, right? Like playing those characters and pushing on that. And as Darren pointed out here, being able to explore NPCs and themes that are bigoted and unethical, but not feel like you're condoning that behavior. I think you have to trust your players, right? And you have to talk to them to build that trust. So sitting down and saying to my players, like, I'm going to make NPCs who are terrible, right? They're going to be abusive. They're going to be awful. They're going to be characters who are going to try to put you in your place, and I'm going to say things through them that I would never in a million years say in my own life. Like I do not believe what they believe. And we're friends, right? The people that I play with, we know each other, we're friends. They're not going to come to me and say, hey, I'm starting to worry that you might actually feel like Reza feels in this setting. And, we had to have moments of checking in to be like, hey, am I pushing it too hard? Is this character like too much? Is this game still a safe place for us to explore this stuff? So as with any kind of activity like that, you set the stage early on, right? You discuss what it is that you're trying to do together. You say, in this universe, say Far Verona, we are going to explore what it means to be a person or not be a person, right? Who gets to decide who people are and who aren't, right? We're going to explore the idea of structures of power. You are going to play what we, in our modern real life thoughts and feelings, might consider to be the bad guys, right? You are the fascistic noble overlords who have decided that non-nobles aren't people, artificial people are especially not people, and we're going to explore that concept within the game. Is everyone okay with that? Is that something that you are interested in doing, right? And having your players buy into that, helping them make characters that fit that mold, and then challenging those characters, and then giving them room to change and to explore, right? Presenting the world as a diverse and interesting place full of characters who believe or don't believe in the status quo. And then check in with your players as you go. Now, I wanted to address specifically, there's a sentence in here that made me shudder a little. So for my campaigns, I want to maintain creative integrity and not race or gender wash it. I don't like forcing artificial diversity or pulling punches on how humans treat each other. This is a lot. There is a lot in here, and I absolutely have to address these two sentences because I think that what Darren is trying to say isn't exactly what we are hearing when we hear these sentences, right? It's a lot. So I do not think that creative integrity and diversity are opposed things. I have gone on record several times as saying that I think that the setting of The Witcher suffers dramatically, like suffers deeply from its attempt to be creatively integrated and to have a reflective racial structure. I think it's boring and it's bullshit from the ground up. I think that we see these arguments all the time of like there was a Battlefield or a Call of Duty game that came out recently that had a black character featured prominently in it, and there were people on the internet who were like, there weren't any black people in the army at this time, and it's like, it's so ignorant. And I think that if we think that something is not racially or gender diverse, chances are pretty good we're wrong. It's just that the stories that we are told about these things are told from a perspective of a very specific subset of people, right? It tends to be that the people telling these stories erase people not like them in those stories. And that's kind of the thing that bothers me about this very European fantasy like universe, right? This idea of like, well, it's a model of European culture in the late medieval period, and there definitely aren't any, people of color in Europe in the medieval. Like, Africa is not that far from Europe. You're just not being told the right stories, right? You're being told these very specific subset of stories, and it's boring, right? So let's try not to think of ourselves as being caught in a position between creative integrity and diversity. These are not opposed. They're not opposed structures, right? On top of that, we're telling stories. We are creating new things, right? And so I don't feel like the need is here to adhere to some like very specific one-sided tale. I think that we have the room to tell the stories that we want to tell, and I think that including a broad diversity of cultures, a broad diversity of skin tones, a broad diversity of genders is not a bad thing. And I think that any game that relies more on telling only one culture's story or only one gender's story without addressing that, like, I feel like that game is undermining the kinds of narratives you can create. And this might just be me, but if somebody comes to me and says, I'm creating a role-playing game setting and I want to tell the story of white Europe, right? I want to tell the story of white Northern Europe, and the characters in this game all have to be this same skin color, and they all have to be this very homogenous group. I'm going to be less interested in that game unless it has something very interesting to say about that particular topic, right? So it's tough. I think that, if you're looking at doing something sci-fi, if you're looking at doing something fantasy, like, let it be diverse. Let that diversity add to the setting. Let that diversity add to your story. Don't try to avoid it. Don't imagine that including people of different backgrounds and different cultures is somehow diluting your game's racial purity, right? Don't be a game design Nazi. Just don't do it. You don't have to. Don't do it. Like, it's that easy, right? Give yourself some room to explore what it's like to be different kinds of people in this setting. And to that same extent, I don't think we have to pull punches on how people treat each other. It's just about showing that there are alternatives, right? We've been telling stories about like racism in games for a long time in varying degrees of success, right? Like, if you hold up Shadowrun, right, in which it's a game in which racism is massively important to its setting in varying degrees of being well handled, right? So hold up Shadowrun and then compare it to any number of modern games, right? I'm thinking of like Harlem Unbound, for example, or really any game that takes a look at it kind of breaks down monoculture, right? Mutants in the Night is a great example. Let's look at those two. So they're both games in which adversity against a marginalized group is significant to the setting and to play, right? Hold those two games up next to each other and look at how different and look at how similar they are. We have been exploring this stuff forever. We're just getting better at it. So I think that the way that we can present a setting in which racism or sexism or whatever, if you want to explore that stuff in a setting, I think that the way that we do that is by looking at it and acknowledging that it is something that we are looking at as players, and that it is something that is in the setting, but that we can change, that we can combat, that we can do something about, right? For me, that's what makes this kind of game palatable, right? Like, I live in a world in which marginalization feels impossible to combat sometimes. I live in a world where it feels like sometimes no matter what you do, you can't make it any better. And I do not want to play a role-playing game in which things cannot change. Because in a role-playing game, maybe I will have the ability to make a difference in a way that I don't feel like I do, or in a flashier way, or a bigger, clearer way than the tiny pieces of work that all have to be built up in real life, right? Maybe I want to be able to explore that in a way that I can change something, right? Because we get it in our heads that's not something that's possible, right? And it kind of goes back, without kind of rambling off too far into another direction, but it kind of goes back to the idea that nothing in a role-playing game needs to be forever, right? The purpose, and this is just good game mastering advice for any game of any topic, nothing about the status quo needs to remain that way, right? If something is true in your universe about a player's character, about an NPC, about the setting, about the structures of power, about the gods, anything can be changed. And change is how we recognize narrative, right? At the beginning of the session, things are this way. At the end of the session, things are this other way. Something has changed. The passage of time creates an artifact, right? A record of what is different now in the setting. So let these things be combatable. Let these things be fightable. Let things change in your game. So I guess to sum it up, right? Get educated, right? Recognize your boundaries, right? Know what you can and can't adequately, safely, and intelligently speak about, right, in your game. Look at the things that you care about. Read a ton of shit, right? Figure out the things that you want to say about it, and then go to your players and talk to them, right? Talk to them about the things that you want to do in the game. Talk to them about the kinds of things that you experience in this universe, right? Talk about your premise, get them to buy in, and listen to them, right? Don't come to the table and say, this is what I'm going to do. Are you in or are you out? Say, this is what I would like to explore. What do you think? And then listen to them, right? Check in as you play, right? Constantly, like every couple of sessions or after a tense scene, acknowledge that it was hard, right? Talk to them about what's going on in the game and make sure everyone is still comfortable. And if people aren't comfortable, then listen to them. I mean, listen to them if they are, but if they say like, yeah, I felt like that was a little intense, maybe we can back off on the aggressive stuff. Maybe like we can use some safety tools for this game, like lines and veils or the X card, to kind of help move away from that stuff. We know that this character's husband is abusive. Maybe we don't need to see it on screen, right? Like talk to your players about what stuff in the ongoing game feels good or doesn't feel good to them, and back off on the stuff that makes the place feel like it's not safe and consenting. And think more critically about what you consider creative integrity. Because for me, telling a story that is accurate to real life or whatever is way, way less important than telling a story in which everyone has a voice. I guess, period. End of statement. Historical accuracy, creative integrity, whatever, none of that is as important as giving everybody a chance to have their experiences and opinions voiced at the table, in the fiction, whatever. And that's it. There's nothing else to say about that. I think that we can use role-playing games to explore serious themes that have connections to the real world. I think we can better understand the real world by playing role-playing games. And I think that we should. But we need to do so, as you say, Darren, in a unethical or presenting the unethical in an ethical manner. I think we can do this safely. And and it requires more work. But that's what you get, right? If you want to tell just like a goofball story of adventure, you probably don't have to check in too hard. But if you're doing something meaningful in this way, if you're exploring something that could impact someone in a real way, then you have to put in the time. You got to put in the work. We are not owed or required to be allowed to say these things. And just always be willing to make changes, right? If somebody tells you you're fucking it up, then be willing to do the work to unfuck it. And that's it. And maybe you come out the other end with something you can be proud of, right? Maybe you come out the other end with something that helps you better understand someone else's point of view in the world or better understand a topic. And if you do, then you've succeeded, right? And to the point, chat brought this up, and I think this is a good point. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the third question, but for me, doing things as a show, it's very important to be upfront and clear about this stuff in a public space, like talking about it during character creation, talking about it during post shows, like giving the audience an opportunity to understand where we're coming from. Because in the same way, you know, we can't get buy-in, we can't get consent from every member of the audience. That's not how this stuff works. That's not how media works. But we can explain what we are trying to do and give people an opportunity to give us feedback, right? I've gotten lots and lots of feedback about Court of Swords as a setting, for example, from people who are closer to the material than I am, people who have a different point of view about the material. And I know that setting is not something that I am immersed in, something I am directly a part of, but it's something that I am trying to do justice to its inspirations. And part of trying to do justice to something, part of trying to present a world where there are analogies or comparisons to the real world, you have to be willing to listen to people. You have to be willing to apologize when you fuck it up, and then just go back. And I couldn't do that if I never talked to my audience, right? If we had never said, this is going to be a show about a culturally varied but racially homogenous European patriarchy, right? In the Roll20 Presents Burning Wheel game. And what we are going to try and do is the players are going to set up beliefs that combat that patriarchal structure. And I, as the GM, am going to play all of the douchebag status quo that tries to keep them down. It's not because I believe the player characters are wrong. I'm trying to create adversity for them to struggle against and theoretically overcome. And making that clear to my audience allowed them to buy in and gave them some context with which to provide feedback. So it's a lot. It's a complex question. There is a lot to this answer, and this is certainly not the end of this conversation. It is several conversations with several types of people, and you want to listen to as many of them as possible. And honestly, having people talk to you about your game is a blessing and a gift, right? Because the easiest thing, and this is the thing, if somebody takes the time to say to you, whether it's a player or a fan or whoever, if somebody takes the time to say to you like, yo, this character is like, there's some stuff wrong with the way you're portraying this character, or like even something simple like, hey, your Vietnamese pronunciation is terrible. Listen, right? They're doing you a massive favor, because the minimum thing they could do is just turn it off. They could just walk away. They could say, I don't care, right? You're fucking it up and I don't care to help you. So being defensive when somebody gives you feedback about this stuff is denying a gift. So I love it. I like it when people tell me like, hey, I'm watching your show. This is a thing I think you could do better at. And I'm thankful for every one of those, even though sometimes it's tough, even though sometimes I feel like, but like my creative vision, but you got to tamp that voice down. People want you to do better. So yeah, share that stuff with your players. If you're streaming it, share it with your audience, and just recognize that sometimes you'll get it wrong, and then you can do better. So our second question comes from Nis, and she asks, this is much more specific. This is about experience points. So Nis says, I started DMing my first game ever of D&D a few months ago, and it's been a hiccupy road, but for the most part, I think everyone involved has been having fun. It's a homebrew world where I implemented your method of giving out XP like you use in Court of Swords. At first, the players didn't quite know what to pick for their goals, so leveling was a bit slow for the first few sessions. But they eventually got the hang of it and started leveling steadily. But now they're level 6 or 7, and they're starting to have trouble finding goals again. I find the main problem that they have when picking goals is the only thing that comes to mind is either something so banal it isn't really worth giving XP for, or it's exactly the same thing as their party quest at the moment, which I try not to accept because it's double dipping XP for the same goal. As the DM, I've been trying to help them slightly change their goals into something that works out, but even I'm starting to have difficulties in that. What can I do to help them? So this is a very specific question about a very specific D&D experience model that we use for Court of Swords, but it's also a question about how to write good beliefs in Burning Wheel, how to write a belief or a goal in Mouse Guard or Torchbearer, how to create a situation in which you are being rewarded for something you are pursuing, right? Now, the goal system that we use in Court of Swords is an alternate version of the milestone system of experience points. So for me, the reason that I added this XP is because I like it when the players are allowed to pursue their own vectors for advancement, right? Milestone doesn't really work for me because I just pick and choose when they get their experience. Or I guess I could tell them. I could say, you get XP when you defeat the Dark Princess Vortha, the All-Consumer. You'll gain a level when you defeat Vortha. But still, like, that's not... I don't know. Like, that's just the next thing that happens. That's the next milestone. It's the next checkpoint. So, yeah, I don't really like that. I didn't think that it was enough. So what I've done is that I give every player in Court of Swords, I give every player the opportunity to write 3 goals at the beginning of every session. Right? They're going to tell me something they want to accomplish. And you'll hear me do this a lot where I'll say, "What's your goal?" They'll explain the goal, and then I'll say, "How will we know you've completed that?" Right? If we can't answer that question, right? If we can't answer the question of, how will I know that you've done it? You can't get experience for it. It's not a good goal. We have to workshop the goal. We have to figure it out. Players also get experience for pursuing the goal, but not accomplishing it. Right? They get to get experience if they tried. Usually, I require that there's like a scene or a roll. There's some kind of risk involved there, but that's how it goes. And then I assign a difficulty based on the goal, and if they achieve that goal, then they get the experience points. Now, it can be hard for some players to write goals. For me, when I'm a player, I always have more things I want to accomplish than I will ever accomplish in a single session. So there's a couple of ways you can do this, right? You can take the Burning Wheel approach, and you can write one goal about something that you want to accomplish this session. You can write another goal about something you want to accomplish overall, right? Short and long-term goals. And then you can write one goal about another character in the party, right? Maybe you want to influence their behavior. Maybe you want to find something out about them. But it has to be a conflict. There has to be some kind of... It can't just be like, my goal is to give my sword to Bart, right? It has to be, I want to convince Bort to wield my +1 sword in my name because I cannot wield it any longer, right? Like, it is cursed to me, but I want him to wield it in my name, right? That's a goal. There's some conflict there. So as the GM, your responsibility during the goal writing process is first and foremost, like everything else, first and foremost, to listen, right? It is to listen to what the players are saying, because what they're saying is, this is what I want in the game, right? If they say, seek out the cult of the fire god, and you ignore that and you never give them the opportunity, you are betraying their goals. So for you want to write down little notes. You want to be taking notes while they're expressing this stuff. Their goals are what they want you to include in the game, right? It's a way for them to flag to you content that they're interested in. So do that, right? First and foremost, listen. Your second job is to help them workshop, right? To make sure that their goals are functional and good and fit with what you consider to be kind of the current situation. So, like, for example, if one of the players writes a goal that is in Court of Swords, for example, right now, if they were to write a goal that was like, go to heaven, I would probably say to them, okay, like that's a good long-term goal. If you can think of ways to pursue it every session, that's fine, but you're not going to accomplish that for a while, right? Right now, we're in the middle of something else. Right? So writing goals is a way to, as a GM, gently guide your players towards what's going on right now. Help them write goals that matter and that are meaningful to the current situation in your game. And then lastly, your job is to weave the goals together. Because for you, if you're doing what I'm doing and you have 4 players and they each have 3 goals, that's 12 goals total. You are never going to see a session where everyone gets all 12, like all 3 of their goals, you get all 12 done in one session. It'll never happen. But you can help by winding them together, right? Helping the players go in the same direction. Now, I'm not fundamentally opposed to goals that are the same as their kind of current mission, because it just means that they care about what they are doing, right? So if you say to them, the Kingdom of Sugar Cakes has set you upon a quest to go to the Castle Widemaw and defeat Vortha, the All-Consuming, and somebody writes a goal that is kill Vortha the All-Consuming, that's fine. That just means that their character believes deeply in that goal, right? They are personally setting out to achieve it. And what I would like to do in this situation is ask the player, how is this different from your quest? Right? What is your specific spin on this? Why do you care about it? Can you write it in a way that expresses something about your character? Because I don't think that it's wrong to have shared goals between players, right? If you all want to go and defeat Vortha, everyone could have a goal about that. That's totally reasonable. If you think that it's messing with XP, then don't do group quests, right? I also kind of think that as long as there's some challenge involved, anything can be a good goal, because it teaches us something about the character, right? Like if a character says, perfect my lute playing, that's interesting. They're saying that they want to get better at the lute. They're saying that their lute playing is something interesting about their character. And they want scenes where they're allowed to explore that. And you can say to them, okay, how are we going to know, right? Maybe, have Ramus approve of my lute playing. That's something you can do. Because then you know that Ramus's player, that Dan will play along. And you can talk to Dan. You can say, all right, Dan, he's going to try, Max is going to try to teach you, to show you he's learned how to play the lute. How will we know that he's succeeded, right? And then Dan can say, all right, well, you need to get a 15 or better to impress Ramus. And so then you've done it, right? And you've set up a goal that involves 2 players, and it gives you the opportunity to get everybody together and put them on the same goal. I think the thing is you don't necessarily want to stress about this too much, right? Goals will come and go. People will adopt them and abandon them. Don't worry about progression. Don't worry if they're like leveling fast enough. It's not a real problem, right? Like it's not a race to level 20. And if they're going fast, if they're going slow, like it just means that the game's pace is what it is. For us, the goal pacing has been like relatively slow. But even the players who are the best at writing goals aren't the farthest ahead compared to the players who are struggling a little bit more, right? There's never been more than like a level difference between any of the characters in terms of earned experience. So yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, setting the goal and taking that 10 minutes to go over them together and workshop them is not wasted time, right? Don't rush through that. Sit down with your players, work through the goals together until you're all comfortable or happy with them, and then let them change every session, right? Play with them. Ideally, in my mind, every session, if the players are writing effective goals, they're going to achieve one every session, and they're going to work towards one or both of the others. But that doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes the session goes in a direction you didn't expect. You can't change goals midstream. So some sessions you just don't get that much experience. But at the end of a big arc, you might end up achieving 2 of your goals, or in a big case, you might get all 3. And that's a thing. So think of the goal creation process as part of catching up on what happened last time, looking forward to what's going to happen, and having your players set flags into the world to point you in the right direction. It's a great opportunity to listen to your players and ask questions about your goals, right? The most important question is, how will we know that you've accomplished that goal? And then after that, it's all practice makes perfect, right? Or at least practice makes progress. There's no such thing as a perfect goal. The only perfect goal is a goal achieved. Yeah. And you'll find that there are ways to game this system. And that's good. You want that, right? You want your players to game it because it's part of a game. You want them to write goals that they're going to achieve. That's how it works. So if it feels like, if you're getting that feeling of like, I think the players are like gaming this goal system, that feeling, that's them doing it right. So let them, right? Like, as long as these goals are being adequately challenged, which is your job to challenge their goals, as long as you're doing your job and they're succeeding, then good. Everything is working. The machine is churning along the way it should. So thank you, Nis. I hope that's helpful. One of these days I'll publish like a guide to goal experience, right? Like Court of Swords style goal experience. I'll put it up on the DMs Guild and all that stuff. But I've been putting it off because I think what I want to do is make it a part of or a supplement to whatever we end up doing with the Court of Swords. Like if we make a book, a campaign setting or whatever, it'll be in there, and then I might release it as a free PDF as like a DLC or whatever. So anyway, informally, that's how it works. You can watch it happen in Court of Swords, and you can see me sort of struggle with it and learn to adapt it as we go. And I hope it works out for you. And if you come across any exciting revelations, please share them with me. So today's last question isn't so much about game mastering necessarily, but about taking all of the game master skills, taking the players and the narrative and all of that, putting it together and presenting it to the universe. So Outro asks, I've been slowly working on figuring out how to stream tabletop role-playing games, and I believe I'm like 80% there. I wanted to know how to set expectations for the players and how to GM for an audience as opposed to exclusively for the group. I'm ambitious and maybe a touch overconfident. So you're having a problem that very few people have. Maybe a touch overconfident, so wanted to know your thoughts on GMing to an audience. My stream link is twitch.tv/outro1. Nice, good plug, Outro. And I'm looking to begin as early as mid-February, which is why I chose to answer this question today, because it never happens as quickly as you think. Recruiting permitting. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your time, Outro. I left my straw in my water bottle. So here's how it go. People are going to tell you that they run role-playing games on Twitch just like they do in real life. They're going to say, it's as if the camera's not even there. They're going to tell you, it's just a bunch of friends hanging out, playing games. They're going to tell you, this is exactly how we play at home. Those people are full of shit, and they are lying to you. Or they don't realize they're lying to you, and maybe their game is terrible. I say people because I've heard this so many times. I've heard this over and over and over. Like, it's just like my game at home, which is not at all the case. Being observed, being even partly aware of being observed, is a change. It changes the way you play. It changes the way you GM. It is different. It is different, right? Now, I think that we have familiarity that can build with players. right? My Roll20 Presents group, right? The group that we have been playing with for years now. That group feels to me like the same level of comfort and the same level of mixture of sort of bullshit and focus, of RP and tactics. Like, that group feels to me like a group of friends playing role-playing games together. However, it's a group of friends playing role-playing games together on the internet for an audience. Right? Now, differentiating that group from, say, Court of Swords feels like a group of friends playing role-playing games together, but it feels different. It feels more focused on the show aspect than Roll20 Presents, and less focused on kind of the minutia of the game. And it feels a little more, I don't want to say formal, but it feels a little more like a show, necessarily, than the Roll20 Presents stuff does. They have different vibes. But both of those things, that vibe is intentional. It is part of what makes that group that group. So I guess that might be my first piece of advice, right? Is figure that out. What is the tone that you were trying to set, right? Is the tone, we are doing a show that is based on a role-playing game, right? Is the tone high production? Is the tone always in character? Is the tone hyper-focused? Or is it a more casual, like, dungeon buds, kind of like we're hanging out and people are drinking beer and we're making jokes, and it's like kind of a casual game of D&D, right? Where is your tonal kind of match for the game? And this includes, and we've talked about this in terms of campaign planning, this includes so much, right? This is thinking about the theme of the game, the degree of which to which you are being serious or silly, the idea of like what kinds of players you are choosing to play, what game are you using, right? How are you going to present this? Are you playing online or in person? All of this stuff, all of these choices are intentional, and they contribute to the tone of your campaign. Do not let anything happen by accident. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't want to leave room for tone to shift and change. And certainly, in the few sessions at the beginning of a campaign, you will learn so much about your players and so much about your campaign that you never planned for, and you have to be open to and flexible about that. But know what you're trying to accomplish going in. So many shows, I think, falter and fail on the idea that if you just show up and turn on your mics and play a role-playing game, people will come and they will like it and they will make fan art and you will build an audience. It doesn't work like that. You can't just do the thing and expect people to like it. You have to engage in the show as a product and give people reason to engage in that. Right? And there are a bunch of kind of smaller best practices. Like, if I had to hammer out a list of things, I'm going to do it. All right, here we go. Let me try to lightning round this shit. I'll just give you like a bunch of stuff that I think is really important. So I think good audio, right? First and foremost, good audio is really important, making sure everybody can hear everybody. That doesn't just mean everybody has expensive mics, but it also means that everybody is reasonably well balanced. Nobody talks over anybody else. Nobody has background noise. You have to be able to have each independent person be able to be heard when they are speaking. You need to develop both a technical and a personal discipline around audio. That is the first and foremost thing. I think most people do other things while they are watching streams. They listen, and they will occasionally tune in for things like combat, or they will watch for particularly engaging moments or whatever, but mostly you want people to be able to hear you. If you do not have that, you do not have a show. For me, I have my own protocols for this stuff, right? But it improves as you play with new players and you figure out like sound balance, you figure out them. Do not be afraid to give each other feedback on this stuff and be like, hey, could you mute your mic more often? Or, hey, I noticed that there's like a fan in the room. Can you turn that off? Or like move it, right? Work together, because audio, you will live and die on audio. So that's the very first and most important thing. You want to, as you said, set expectations for your players, right? Talk to your players. Share with them your ideas for the show. Say, I want this show to be not just like campaign shit. Like you have to do all of your GMing work, right? All of the usual work that you have to do. Plus, you have to do your producer work. So not only do you have to have a session 0, but you have to include in your session 0 or your session -1, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the themes of the game? What do I expect from you as players? What do I need to make this work? And what do you think, right? What can I get from you to help me accomplish that? And where do you think that we need to change that? Are you on board? And part of that being on board comes to my second major point is scheduling. Make sure that people are committing to something. Now, this is true in role-playing games on Twitch as it is in role-playing games in real life. If you go 3 or 4 weeks without playing a campaign, you are one campaign death save away from your show being ruined, right? Because even if you can come back after that 4 weeks of like unintentional scheduling problems, even if you can come back, the players are going to be unfocused. The players are going to have a hard time reconnecting. So if you are going to be away for a long time, or if you are having scheduling problems, find ways to compensate, right? Stay in contact with your players, do a one-shot set in the same universe. I don't know, find ways to fill that gap. And I don't just mean you're going to lose audience, because audience will come and go. I mean, you are going to lose player cohesion, because nothing kills the excitement worse than being like, oh shit, we've missed 4 weeks in a row. The show is finally coming back. We're all really excited. You come back to the table, your audience is there, everybody's ready to watch the comeback, and none of the players remember like their accents that they were doing for their character. They don't remember the rules. They forget where you are in the session. You spend the whole session trying to remember things, and it's just deflated. The thing has fallen out. So especially early on, it is so important to build momentum, right? Build momentum. That's the most important thing. It's not about regularity necessarily. It's not about, it's not even about like maintaining a set schedule, because I think if you can do that, that's great. If you can be like every Thursday, 2 p.m., whatever, that's great. But I think it's more important that you just continue to like move that momentum forward, keep stuff going on, and set that expectation from the get-go. And if somebody in your group can't meet that expectation, maybe they are not a good fit for what you're trying to do, because you set the expectation at the beginning. You sat down with your players and said, we need to do 10 episodes in the next 3 months. 10 episodes in 3 months. Can we do that? Can you commit to doing 10 episodes in 3 months? And if a month in, somebody's already been like, I got to reschedule twice, maybe it's time to like renew that conversation. Be like, hey, so, we've done 2 episodes this month, and 2 of the 4 you had to drop out for. Part of what can help with this is knowing how many people you need in the group, right? To go. For me, if I'm missing one player, I don't like, even one player I don't like continuing without, but with some shows, in some situations, it's okay. Like we didn't have Lauren for an episode of Dragon Heist, but the momentum was more important, and we found a way for her character just not to be present, just out of pure luck. So I think that you can get by. You can understand what to do if you have to miss a week, but trying to make up for it, trying to make sure that you're just engaged. And this isn't about obligation. This isn't about forcing people to be there. This is about passion. It's about everybody wanting to be part of this thing. I think the other thing that you can do when you're casting is talk to people about what else they have going on, like what other obligations they have, and try to be frank about how important this kind of thing is to them, right? Be like, if you had to prioritize this show, what would be above it and what would be below it? Like, I think that's important to know, and I think we don't do a very good job talking about that. Like, for Court of Swords, for example, we generally understand that if somebody has like a sponsored event that comes up and it's during an episode of Court of Swords, we all understand that we have work to do, right? That there are sometimes business decisions that have to get prioritized above doing an episode of Court of Swords. And so we're not going to be too harsh about it. And we try to warn people in advance and we try to reschedule, right? Because we know that that's how it works, right? If we have to miss a week of Far Verona because Anne is away being a Rainbow Six pro, that's part of the job. We know, right? And Anne does a great job of trying to reschedule and making sure that we can jump right back in when we get there, right? You want to have players that are responsible. And that's the biggest thing, is like having them care about the work that you're all doing as much. Now, there's some difficulty that can build up around, like, whose channel do you stream it on? Do you all kind of co-own an additional channel, right? Are you like a role play where we all go to JP's house and play games there, right? And he uses the Patreon money to compensate everybody for their time, right? There are people that get paid to play this game in his channel on his house. Or is it more like an encounter RP or there's a bunch of channels like this, where the channel exists independent of any given person. There are people who run the channel, but that everybody is essentially a guest on that channel, right? And they all kind of contribute together and own some portion of it. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but you want to make sure that people are compensated for their time. And that may not mean money, because that's the hardest thing to come by when you're growing your channel, right? But it may simply be in expectations of promotion. It may be in whatever makes sense for that group, right? It may be like, we're going to do one show on this channel and we'll do a different show on this other channel, right? You got to talk about it. And again, like, whenever you're making these kinds of business decisions, which is what they are, right? When you're streaming a show with the intention of building an audience and getting subscribers and being paid, you have to make business decisions intelligently. You have to talk about it. You have to bring it up. And I think that a lot of the time we get scared because we're like, but it's supposed to just be some friends hanging out and having fun. And if we talk about money, or if we talk about promo, or if we talk about expectation, or we treat it like a business, then we've ruined it, right? It's not just some buds hanging out, drinking beer, playing RPGs. Now it's a business, but it was a business when you started. And there's nothing wrong with that. You want to make something together. You want to create something exciting and fun, and you want people to engage with it. And hopefully you want people to pay you for making it. And getting that agreement out the gate at the beginning is how you make it safe. Like, I have contracts with Roleplay and with Roll20. If I do some kind of promotional thing, I will either get someone to sign a contract, or I will at the very, very least establish exactly what is expected of me and of them and how it's going to work, right? I'm very clear about it. I will say I have 3 hours. I can't go any longer than that. So please, like, respect my time. I want to have breaks every hour, or a break every hour and a half. I need that. And this is how much money I expect to be paid for doing this work, for running this show. And if it's a situation in which money isn't exchanging hands, then I'll say that. I'll be like, normally this is my rate, but I'm trying to support your channel, or I'm supporting, you're raising money for charity, or I just really want to play with you, so you don't have to pay me, but could you do this instead, right? Could you tweet my channel? Could you post on your Instagram or whatever, right? Like, I'm clear about the things that I need to make participation in a game feel comfortable for me. And when you're playing with people who are not used to doing that, if you're creating a brand new show, you're playing with people who are not already broadcasters, it kind of falls on the organizer, which, Outro, I guess in your case, is you're playing as GM, you're producing, you're the organizer. It's going to fall on you to say to your players, like, here is what I can give you in terms of compensation, right? We're starting new. We don't have any money. This is not like a thing that is making money yet, but when we get to a point where that's happening, this is how I'm going to share that with you. And in the meantime, here's what I'm going to do to boost your own personal work, etc. Right? Like lay it out. And I think that for me, anybody who shies away from that conversation, anybody who's like, I don't want to talk money. Like, can it just be informal? Can we just do it? That person is going to be hard to work with later when they wish that they had signed a contract. Like, if you don't talk about this, what are you going to do? So think about situations like this. What are you going to do when you run your first stream and somebody comes in and they donate $500? What are you going to do? They just gave you, your channel, $500. Now, you didn't have a conversation about money. You didn't have a conversation about donations or anything like that. What do you do with that money, right? Do you just keep it and don't say anything? Do you split it between your players? Like, you didn't talk about it in advance, so now you're in this awkward position of not knowing. Your players are in an awkward position of not knowing how to, like, ask you for a part of that money. Like, it just creates tension that doesn't need to be there. Contracts exist, formal or informal. They exist to help us understand when something happens, what we can expect out of it. A contract is an apocalypse world move, right? A contract is, when this happens, here are the potential results. If you don't have a contract, they all look to you to find out what happens. And you may give them an answer that they feel uncomfortable about, right? So create certainty. Part of that certainty is building momentum, having good equipment, having a vision for the game, and then delivering on that vision while letting yourself be surprised by what happens, right? If it sounds like a lot of work, if it sounds complicated, and if it sounds like more than just like flipping on OBS and capturing some screens, it's because it is. It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And I think that I'm thankful for having had the opportunity to get that experience. Obviously there is a lot more to it, but I think you're doing the right thing. You are asking questions of people that have experience, right? Hi, hello. You're thinking about these things in advance. And I think the other thing you can do is just like watch a bunch of other people stream and figure out what you like and what you don't like, right? Watch Roleplay, watch Roll20 Presents, watch a bunch of other stuff on D&D, watch Matt Colville, watch Critical Role, etc., 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 etc. Like watch all of this other stuff and find the things that you are interested in, find the things that like work or don't work, and then make a list, right? Do the thing and recognize that it's a long road, and we're in a time now where there are so many kind of new RPG podcasts, new RPG shows, etc., and that it's a thing, right? And that there's a lot of competition right now, so it takes a lot to stand out. The other thing that I would suggest, and this is more like a community and audience building effort, is just like be present in other communities, and not be present just so you can like siphon people into yours, right? But building up, and Outro is doing a great job of this. I've seen Outro do this. Building up good energy in other spaces, right? Hanging out, being a part of other communities, doing moderation, like building a name for yourself, becoming someone that people can look at and be like, oh, this is somebody that I think is cool, and I've seen them do the work. John Harper is a great example of this. So John has this thing that he has done in his history of making excellent games and giving them away for free, right? Just making like cool games and being really helpful and graphic designing for other games, right? He did the cover for Fiasco and he did the logo for Dungeon World, and like he's just been around and been part of the scene and been just like helpful and giving of his energy for a long time. And then when Blades in the Dark came out and the Kickstarter came out, John converted a bunch of his social currency into money for his game, right? Because people were like, oh, John Harper. John made all these cool games I've already played. John was really helpful. John is a part of the community that I respect and appreciate. I'm excited to back his new game. And so the same thing can happen when you are participating in a community, when you are doing things outside of your own space for the sake of doing them, for being a good person, for being a part of that universe. You are building a reputation. You are creating social currency for yourself, so that when you go out into the world to create your own endeavor, people will see your name and they will say, oh, this is that person that I know. I have good energy about that person already. And this is a thing that you can do. I mean, we should all be doing this anyway. We should all just be being a good part of the communities of the stuff that we like, and participating as members of that community. Creating that social footprint. And it works. It can work. It's how Dungeon World existed. It's how Dungeon World became successful. It's how my channel got started, right? It's how all of the stuff that I'm doing works, because I did the same thing. I was a part of spaces, and I tried to contribute and exist in those spaces in a positive way. And then when the time came to ask for something from those communities, I was ready to do that. So, these things take time. It takes patience, and it takes hard work, and success takes more than a little bit of opportunity. And I was going to say luck, but I think it's more about holding your action and recognizing the right opportunity to jump on. So, yeah, again, a ton to it, a lot to it, but hopefully that's spurred you in the right direction, giving you some stuff to think about. I think you can see a lot of people doing that work, right? I think that like fan art is a great way to build social currency. I know that, like, recently, I had some budget for Mad Mage. I have some budget for Mad Mage to get new character art designed. And when I thought, okay, who should I give this money to make me character art? My first thought was, oh, we have Parappa the Kappa. We have this fan artist who made this amazing free fan drawing, right? They made a drawing of all the characters from Dragon Heist. I'm going to give this person money to make more art. And for them, it was an act of love. It was an act of like, I like this game. I like these characters. I'm making art of them. And now I'm able to pay that back. But it wasn't like that was the first piece of art they'd ever done, right? So you got to put in the work. So like moderate for other channels, hang out in the channel, be a part of the community, help out, put your energy into communities. And then when it's time to build your own, people they'll recognize the effort that you put in. So yeah, thank you, my friends, for recognizing the effort that I put in, and for coming and watching Office Hours. Thank you for your questions, everybody. I hope that today was an interesting one. We had a lot to say today. This is like an extra long episode. If you have questions about game design or RPGs or streaming RPGs or any of the things that I am currently professoring about, you can submit them on my website, www.adam-koble.com. There's a little button. It says Office Hours. If you click it, there will be a form. If you fill that form out and you hit submit, I will see it, and then I'll answer your question. As I said, we're like 6 or 7 weeks back from questions. So post your question and then be patient, because we'll get to it. Yeah, this has been episode number 79. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for watching and for listening and for offering your thoughts and feedbacks in the chat. That's it for me. I will see you next time for episode number 80. Bye, y'all.